So yeah, like Maddie said, I lead the customer success engineering department at RAZA. And my team basically works with all kinds of enterprise companies. We work with them. Yeah, my team of solutions engineers helps them build their assistants and make the most of RAZA's tools to help them be successful. And so yeah, as Maddie said, I'm going to be talking about multibot orchestration and also voice. Some of you may have been a year ago at our conference there. I talked about, my talk was called Metabots, Why They're Probably Not the Solution to Your Problems. So I talked about multibot orchestration and bot routing and why that probably isn't going to solve the problems you're actually having. And today I want to talk about what has changed since then. So I want to talk about some industry trends that we've seen. We've seen an increase in the complexity and enterprise scale. Like that doesn't just mean, you have a lot of users anymore. There's a lot of different aspects to this. And I also want to talk about the increase in demand for voice. This is also something that has become increasingly important. And with these two industry trends, I specifically want to address how we solve these problems with multibot orchestration at RAZA. And so to give you a bit of context about what I mean with enterprise scale, basically we found that, we did some research and enterprises are just building bigger and better conversational assistants. And from our research, we found that more than half of organizations that are building AI assistants have at least 3 or more already. And of course, the larger the company, the more virtual assistants they're going to be building. And of all these enterprises that we talked to, 88% of them expect their use of virtual assistants to increase in the next 5 years. So this is really just an active area at this point. People have proved the value of conversational AI and they want to keep working on it. And let's also talk about the different aspects there are to scale. Like I said, this isn't just an increase in users anymore. There's all kinds of things that you need to consider. So with an increase in users, of course, your user base is going to be very diverse. There's not just going to be, it's not just all going to be people that are 30. There might be different types of people that talk differently, like millennials might articulate things differently to people of different age groups. They might expect different responses and so on. So you need to kind of account for this. Then you also probably want to deploy your bot on multiple different channels. People don't just get in touch with you via, WhatsApp. They want to get in touch with you via your website, via phone, and all kinds of other channels. You also probably have users that speak in different languages. As you have more users, they're not all going to speak English, even if you are based in the US or the UK. So you need to account for this as well. Then, of course, multiple skills is a given. Your bot isn't just going to be able to do one thing. It has to do multiple things like transferring money, checking your account balance if it's a finance bot, all kinds of things. And of course, most enterprises want to build multiple bots. So that's another aspect of scale. And these are all things that you need to take into account from the perspective of your assistant. But there's also the aspect of the team building that assistant. That has also changed. I think a few years ago, or 4 years ago when I first started at RAZA, we mostly worked with teams of maybe 2 or 3 developers who are kind of building these assistants by themselves, maybe as a side project. But this is no longer the case. Most teams that we work with now, there's actually a lot of different personas in there. There's developers, there's business users, there's content creators, all kinds of people. And these all need to work together somehow to build the assistant. And of course, if you're building multiple bots, then there will also be multiple teams within the organization. So you also need to, navigate how these teams are going to work with each other. And so this aspect of the channel aspect of scale, I want to talk about voice here as well. This is the other trend that we've seen. Voice has actually become a lot more important in the past few years. And it makes sense, right? the IVR experiences today kind of suck, but people still want to contact you that way, right? But you call up your, telecommunications provider, and you get this automated voice that says, press 1 to do this, press 2 to do that, and it's just not a great user experience. From our research here, we also found that almost half of enterprises' virtual assistants already incorporate voice, and most of them want to expand the use of it. And we actually also have a lot of enterprises and customers that have very ambitious goals. For example, a telecommunications provider in North America wants to automate 40% of their calls in the next 5 years. This is a pretty big target. It's not something that's just going to be, easy, but it's a good target, and I assume is also going to save them a lot of money. And so, these two industry trends that I just talked about, so enterprise scale and voice. What solution do enterprises default to here today when talking about that? Something called multibot orchestration. And so I think a lot of you probably know what multibot orchestration is, but just in case you don't, let me just briefly explain that here as well. So the idea here is that an enterprise might build multiple different bots, but kind of want their user to be able to talk to all of them through a single channel. And so basically what they end up building is this routing system to route the user between these different bots. So that involves the user talking to this main bot, which then kind of identifies what the user wants and then sends them on to a different bot to ultimately solve the problem that they're having. And I think there's a lot of issues with this. I would say there's actually more problems than benefits to this solution. And that is exactly why I and we at RAZA, everybody thinks that multi-bot orchestration this way is not actually the solution to your problem. And instead, at RAZA, we think that you should be composing your assistants at build time. So if you're building these multiple bots, you can do that separately. But once it comes to actually deploying the model and your user talking to it, this should be one unified model as opposed to this bot routing approach. And I'm sure you're all asking yourselves, why? Why should we do this? I mean, I'm well aware of the fact that this is not something that is standard in the industry at this point. I mean, there's like 2,000 other conversational AI vendors out there, and most of them still think that, multi-bot routing is the way to go, or they at least let people do it. Even IBM Watson, like the big people in the game, do it this way. So let me give you all the reasons why we believe that this composing at build time approach is better. So first of all, it's a better user experience. With this bot routing approach that I talked about, you are kind of forcing your user to adhere to this architecture that you've created. But the user doesn't actually know about this, right? Like context switching in this bot routing scenario becomes a lot harder. Like once the user has been routed to your financial bot, how do they get to the sales bot if they want to talk to that? It's a lot more difficult. In fact, most people that do bot routing don't actually allow this. But the user doesn't know about that. And actually, I mean, why should they, right? They just want their problem to be solved. But by setting up this architecture, you're imposing these rules. As opposed to if you have this unified model, you kind of just allow for a lot more flexibility there. You just let the user get their problem addressed and they're happy. The same thing goes for the people actually building the bots. It's a better experience for them as well. So you can still, with this approach, you can still build your bots separately if you want to. Some people might have different teams working on multiple bots. You can still do that. But by merging these different areas of the assistant at build time, you're actually able to do end-to-end testing a lot easier. You'll be able to do regression testing a lot easier, and so on. You can, in that sense, you can make sure that changes one team has made isn't going to affect the other teams, and you can just ship at a higher velocity then. The reason, so this bot routing architecture that enterprises do traditionally comes from a microservices architecture. So And that kind of works because you have very strict AIs in that area, so you can easily test that. But in the conversational AI domain, the API is not just your kind of routing API. It's also your user behavior and how the bot themselves work. So there's a lot more complexity there, and you can't really make sure everything functions correctly as easily, which is why this unified approach really just allows you to make sure everything is working and in the end ship faster. Another reason we believe in this composing at build time approach is because it is the foundation for breaking free from intents. So I'm sure you probably heard Alan talk about this before, or you've read his blog post, but we think that to build the next generation of conversational assistants, we need to eventually get rid of intents. Like if you look at this example here, you have a user looking for a restaurant and they say that they had Chinese food yesterday. That doesn't really fit into intent, right? But the user still wants you to understand that. And intents kind of impose these rules that I talked about as well. But so yeah, to get to the next level of conversational assistance, we think that we just don't need intents anymore. And we should get rid of them eventually. And we've already made some progress there. We've shipped end-to-end as an experimental feature, and we're planning to productionalize that in the next few years. And this composing at build time approach that I'm talking about it's a lot easier to address kind of contextual references in that scenario than the bot routing approach. Then a lot of you might be asking, but what about if there's multiple teams working on different parts of the assistant? And what if I don't want them to see the data, like the other team's data? What if this needs to go through some legal approval or security checks and so on? How does that work with this merging at build time approach? Well, basically, you can still completely separately build these assistants. Like, they don't have to be in the same repository. You can have different repositories and just merge them in your CI at build time and deploy that to your end user. So you can still have them build it separately, go through any checks you need to, and then once you're ready, once the individual components of the bot have been checked, you can push that to your CI, let it build it, and deploy the bot. The same way as you would do that with a bot routing approach. And the other question that I get a lot is, what about if my model has too many intents? Like, isn't that going to break at some point if I have hundreds of intents? Like at the beginning, you start off with, checking your balance. At some point, you have all these different skills. But actually, I have almost never encountered a situation where an NLU model actually has too many intents or where anyone has run into this problem. I feel like it's a theoretical problem a lot of the time. In reality, if you have NLU model issues, it's very likely that your training data is just structured wrong, and you need to kind of address that. And for that, we have tools available in both RAZA X and RAZA Enterprise. There's this feature called NLU Insights, which helps you kind of identify issues with your model and helps you fix them. So you can kind of address any issues there. And if you do need, a hierarchical structure to your intents, like if you have a lot of chit chat or a lot of FAQs, we have a response selector that you can use, which kind of creates a mini NLU model in your bigger NLU model. So I don't think that this is a real concern. And now I hope that I have convinced you with all these reasons that this is the right way to do things. So you might now be wondering, how does voice play into this? Like I mentioned voice at the beginning, but what does that have to do with multibot orchestration? And basically, a voice assistant is just one of many channels that your customers contact you on. So it's basically just a flavor of this multibot topic. You are most likely going to have your voice assistant is most likely not going to be some completely separate thing from your existing assistants. It's probably going to be some different version of it. And so there's going to be a lot of shared data between the two, and you're basically just building multiple versions of the same assistant. But of course, not everything is the same. There are also some differences. Like end users interact with you differently via voice than via text. Like people, in text, you do a lot of, one-word responses, whereas in voice, you're more likely to articulate what you want. So there will be some implementation details that actually differ in these two versions of the assistant. So if we take this example here, on the left, you have this text bot, which uses some buttons to help the user kind of make a decision. That works great there, but that's not a thing that you can do through the voice channel, right? Buttons don't exist there. You just have to rely on the user telling you things. So you might have to change some of your responses in the voice version. The users might say some different things. So you have to make some changes to your NLU model. So there is a few differences that you need to take into consideration. And yeah, how do we do this the RAZA way? So before I talk about this Multibot different versions of the assistant, I actually just want to address voice in general as well. I think that a lot of people think RAZA is just a tool to make text assistants, just because that's the main thing we've been doing for the past few years, and those are the open source channels we've had available. But actually, doing voice with RAZA is very doable as well. We've had a lot of customers integrate with various IVR systems. Just to name a few, we've integrated with Amazon Connect, we've integrated with Genesis, Cisco's IVR system. So it's very much doable. And as of version 2.6 of RAZA open source, we also published a Twilio voice connector. So you can build an IVR bot easily with Twilio as well now. So yeah, the IVR system, in this case Twilio, takes care of the whole logistics of receiving phone calls and stuff like that, as well as speech to text and text to speech. And the RAZA model then takes care of all the underlying logic. So the same way it would in a text block, it takes part of that aspect. Right, and now the topic of how do you build a text bot and a voice bot with RAZA, and how do you avoid duplicating a lot of work? So like I said, there's a lot of overlap here. So you will probably, most enterprises I think have probably published their text bot first, so you can reuse a lot of data from there. And what we suggest in this situation is that you actually just have 3 different modules. You have your shared module where actually a lot of stuff will probably go in there, like a lot of your NLU data will be the same. A lot of the responses will be the same. A lot of the stories will be the same because, there shouldn't be too much difference there. So you have this component in one folder, and then you have 2 other, the text-specific component and the voice-specific component. So in your text bot, there might be some easy things like, you need to change your responses for the voice thing. Like if there are URLs in your text bot, you probably don't want your voice bot to read out HTTPS and so on. You just want to say you can do this on our website. So that's kind of an easy thing. But then there might also be some more complex things, like you need some different story flows because the text one is a bit too long for voice, or you might need to add some extra NLU data because to address some issues with speech to text or your users talking differently. So you kind of have these 2 separate components to do that. And as you build these out, whether that's in separate teams or the same team, you can kind of store those separately. And then when it comes to deploying the bots to production, you can kind of pick and choose which components you need and build a model to then publish to your end user. So in the case of the text bot, you take the text component and the shared component. And in the case of the voice bot, you take the voice component and the shared component and kind of train those models separately, deploy them to production, and then you have 2 versions of the same bot. And this is actually something that one of our customers, NIB, they're an Australian health provider. They have been doing this successfully and with exactly this method. And this is something that has allowed them to go into production with a voice version of their existing text assistant in just a matter of months. They didn't have to start over from scratch, like completely for a voice bot. They could really use a lot of existing components and just build this additional variation. Right, and so now I've talked a lot about the way you should be doing things, and so there's the question, are the tools that exist today enough to easily achieve this? In short, the answer for that is no. There's a lot of tools out there already, but I don't think we're fully there yet to do everything. A lot of the stuff you can already do with Rasa open source because it's open source. So you can easily, you can, put in a few tricks in your CI pipeline to kind of pull out these separate components and merge them at build time. But there's not that much native support for it yet, which is also something we're looking at. But the main thing we're looking at as well is our enterprise product, Rasa Enterprise. So our vision for that is to actually build a platform that lets you handle all this complexity. So what we've heard from all our enterprises that are our customers is that they want to build a unified brand conversation and customer experience. So you want the same experience for the customer across a bunch of different channels, and you want it to be a great experience. And so, the tool that we want to build here is to help companies address all these challenges with scale. We want to help them, we want this tool to be able to help them collaborate between teams to address all the data complexity that comes with multiple bots and everything else. And just, the ultimate goal is to let our customers build a great end user experience and to build the tools to support them with that. So just to close this off, the main thing I want you to get from this talk is that this traditional multi-bot orchestration through bot routing is not going to help you build the next generation of assistants. We believe that this composing at build time approach that I've been talking about is what is going to get you to the next level, whether that's level 4, level 5, or whatever comes next. So I hope I've convinced you of this, and that's it from me. And now, now we have some questions. You can also get in touch with me on this platform via Twitter, but thanks.